Day 4 to 6:07 p.m. Our Mother of Perpetual Help Church, Lakeville Subdivision, Molino 7, Bacoor City, Cavite. Everyone saw that flash of purple light from Mark's house, and they were all flabbergasted seeing how the infected around the area were agitated after that flash of light happened. They could not help but look at Mark with confusion. "Gerger, what is that light?" May asked Mark, voicing the words in everyone's mind at the moment. Mark, on the other hand, was having a hard time to answer that question. He recognized that flash of light since he had seen it several times before. It was 6 years ago when he experienced a very spectacular event that would surely not happen once again even if he reincarnated. At that day 6 years ago, he was walking home after college. He was running late at that time because they had to chase of the deadline of their thesis. Because of the time they finished their work, which was almost 11 in the evening, it was hard to find a passenger vehicle to commute, and as such, he had to walk all the way home. In eagerness to reach his house faster, he strayed away from the main road and went towards several secluded streets for a shortcut. In the end, he saved a lot of time going through those dangerous streets. Even though those places were dangerous due to being secluded and the lack of people, he was not fazed. If he was to ask, with his face, he was the one who would look like a criminal. Some of the people walking at those streets even tried to stay away from him as he passed by. One of the areas he passed by that time was a wide undeveloped plot of land with a dirt path going through it. Aside from the dirt path, the place was covered with grass and trees. Walking through that plot of land looked scary. Nevertheless, he walked through like it was nothing. He had several more frightening encounters when he was a child. As such, walking through a place like that would be nothing. He also did not expect that something would happen. Mark was wrong at that time, however. There was a flash of light in the sky, which he learned later that it came from the explosion of the large meteorite after a missile from the United States hit it. That flash illuminated the dark sky as if it was daytime for several seconds. That was not the issue, however. After the meteorite exploded, he saw quite a number of balls of light flashing across the sky like Dragon Balls scattering across the world. One of those balls of light and the biggest one were actually heading straight towards him. Thinking that it was a dangerous thing, he started to run away. He managed to get out of the plot and watched the falling ball of light. The ball of light fell into the plot of land, but the explosion he expected, however, did not happen. Out of curiosity, he went back and saw the actual appearance of the ball of light exactly at the place where he stood before while watching the sky. At that place, he saw a double-terminated crystal with a vivid violet color defying the laws of physics and was floating about 3 feet in the air while flashing a violet-colored light. Around the double-terminated crystal, there were 3 marble-sized sphere crystals circling around. Fascinated by the sight, Mark subconsciously moved closer. He then saw that while one of the sphere crystals had the same appearance as the double-terminated crystal, the other 2 did not. The 2 had the same vivid violet color outside, but he could see a golden orb glowing inside one, and while there was a red orb glowing inside the other. Mark went closer even more to inspect the odd crystals, but he did not expect that the crystal with the golden orb would fly towards him. He tried to dodge, but the crystal kept on following. Without any other choice, he caught the crystal with his bare hands. Managing to catch it, he felt relieved just to see the crystal crumble into golden wisps of light and entered his body. He panicked a bit as he was caught off guard by the event. Seeing something unknown enter your body was an experience anyone would panic to. Feeling that there was nothing wrong with his body, he felt a bit relieved, but it still bothered him. He then approached the remaining floating crystals, but none of them behaved the same way as the one that flew towards him. Mark then took off his jacket and wrapped the crystals with it, bringing the crystals home. He did not understand why he did it, but he just thought of bringing it home for no apparent reason at that time. After arriving home, he removed the crystals from the jacket and all of it continued to behave the same way when he found them. The bigger crystal floated 3 feet from the ground while the smaller crystals flew around the larger one in an orbit. He tried touching the 2 other sphere crystals, but nothing happened. With that, he encased the crystal except for the one with a red glow in a large glass-sealed jar. The crystals inside the jar continued to behave the same way, hovering at the center of the jar. The bizarre crystals became one of his precious collections. However, due to the bizarreness of the crystals, he did not dare display it or someone might see it accidentally and just hid the jar inside the closet. That night, however, he fell ill. He had fever for the whole night. He was afraid that it was because of the crystal that entered his body, but he recovered the next morning. Due to being fan of manga, anime and video games, he also thought that the crystal would give him some sort of ability. Nonetheless, the crystal did not seem so, and he felt like an idiot for trying out several things like some spider dude before he learned to shoot webs. Thus, he continued his normal life then. A normal life, staying as far away from places with many people due to him feeling exhausted for staying at those places for a long time. However, one thing that made him happy was that his exhausted mind would feel revitalized after going home ever since he found the crystals. Time passed and he felt that he was starting to develop a sort of dislike in overly populated places, and he would feel exhausted even faster. That was when he learned that he was an empath and his ability in that field was growing. A year later, another bizarre thing happened at the crystals at the jar. Mark saw a bright purple light seeping out of his closet, flashing several times. When he checked, he saw another marble-sized crystal inside the jar aside from the previous one. And thus, 6 years later, there were now 6 marble-sized crystals floating around the larger crystal. Back to the current time, Mark could not think of any reason for the crystals for flash that bright light at this moment in time. It was not the time for it to produce another marble-sized crystal. Furthermore, that flash was obviously brighter than the previous circumstances, even baffling him some more. Unless those crystals had some relation to the outbreak, which Mark found hard to imagine. The crystals appeared 6 years ago and the outbreak started 4 days ago. The only thing that could link the two was that both circumstances originated from a meteorite coming from space. Mark suddenly woke up from his deep thinking as he saw a small hand waving in front of his face while he contemplated. "Can you move your hand away from my face?" Mark looked at Emika, who was gleefully making fun of him. "Hee, I thought scary uncle was sleeping." Emika hurriedly pulled her hand back. "Gurgur, is something wrong?" May worriedly asked, which made Mark shook his head. "I'm just thinking why that flash of light happened." "Then boss, you don't know what made that flash of light?" Melissa interjected. "Actually, I know what caused it, but it shouldn't create a bright flash like that, and not at this time of the year." Everyone stared at him with askance. "Are you related with the outbreak, boss?" Melissa asked. After all, they saw how the infected got agitated after that flash of light. It meant that whatever that caused that light was somehow related to the infected. Mark knew of that cause, and the place it originated was his house. Anyone who could think would have that suspicion. Peeved. Mark smirked. "If I'm related to the outbreak, then I wouldn't be trapped in a mall. You know that? And I will surely prepare for the outbreak if that was the case. However, if not for my wits and luck, I could already be dead now." Those words dispelled Melissa's line of thought. She already saw a lot of things Mark did, and to say, he was really not prepared for everything, and he was just using any means he could think of. "But what is that flash of light?" Carlo asked. Mark then rummaged in his bag for some reason, making everyone confused. He then pulled out the small strap bag he was carrying even before the outbreak. From that strap bag, he pulled out a small bottle sealed with a metal cap. Inside the bottle was a marble-sized sphere crystal with a vivid purple color and a red glowing orb at the center of the crystal. Mark showed the bottle to everyone, making everyone amazed. It was because they could see that the bizarre crystal was floating inside the bottle like magic. "You see, the cause of that light was similar to this one. Just a little bit larger. Oh right. I have a picture and a video of that. Wait a minute." Mark rummaged inside the bag again and found his old phone. The one he also used before the outbreak. Browsing in the gallery, he found the picture and the video of the crystal in the jar and showed it to them. They were all stunned at the bizarre and amazing sight of a set of crystals floating in the air. "This is not edited?" Melissa asked once more. "There is this one, and you ask if it's edited?" Mark held the small bottle and shook it in his hand. He then told the summary of how he found the crystals to them after he made the drone land at the roof on one tall house nearby his home. Well, that's how I found it. That should be the thing that created that flash of light. Mark finished story but hid the fact that one of the crystals entered his body and just changed that part, telling everyone that the crystals would vanish after being touched. Everyone showed a different face towards his story. After all, it sounded some sort of fantasy story theme. Still, they could not deny it as the bottle on Mark's hand was the evidence. Then Master, if you found those 6 years ago, why does it seem that the infected were after it now? Odalina spoke her thoughts. Actually, that is also what I'm thinking about. Mark could also not make head or tails of the issue. Well, those crystals were actually among the things I wanted to take away, so we'll probably learn the reasons in the future. Mark continued. Bro, you still want to go home with all those infected around? Carlo could not help but ask. After all, it would be a suicide mission. Everyone around also looked worried about what he wanted to do. You all know that the infected wanted those crystals, right? Then, that's more the reason to not let them get it, or else, who knows what will happen. Mark voiced a reason no one in the group could refute. They all saw what happened on the scene captured through the drone. It was obvious now what was the reason why the infected gathered around this remote area. All right. Who will prepare dinner? Mark asked because of the state Anna was in. That's my work. Anna surprisingly spoke up. Her mood was still down, but it seemed that she did not want to shirk her duty. Are you sure? Odalina asked. After all, she knew how it was hard to lose your family, since she thought that aside from her husband, her children also did not make it before. I'm fine. Help me a little though. After that exchange, Mark told the group to rest early after telling them his plan on retrieving his things from his house. Day 4 to 9:16 p.m. Our Mother of Perpetual Help Church, Lakeville Subdivision, Molino 7, Bacoor City, Cavite. At the basement area of the church, almost everyone was asleep already. Because of the lack of rooms, the 2 bedrooms beside the basement parking was occupied by the females and children, while one of the utility room was emptied and a bedding was placed for Carlo and Roland. After several days of just using wet cloth on their bodies to clean themselves, everyone finally managed to take a bath. It was not because there was running water on the church. Just several lots to the east on the other side of the street, the subdivision's water tower was located. They managed to fetch water from the water tower and managed to take a bath. As the water line of the water tower was private, Mark was not worried about contamination, though they would sure not try to use this water for cooking. For the lookout, everyone would take shifts the whole night. At this moment, it was Carlo and Sundra's shift and they were on the balcony of the church. It was not really necessary because of Laylap's existence, but they still did so for the sake of feeling secure. It was also because Mark knew that Laylap's breed was not of a guard dog but of a hunting dog. It did not mean that Laylap's would be unreliable, but her skill in this field was lower. Mark, on the other hand, was currently inside the vehicle with May, Abigail and Odalina. If she could be considered as their member, Jeanette was also inside the vehicle. Strange enough, she was sleeping. Mark did not make her sleep, and rather, she slept on her own volition. Abigail was also asleep on the other sofa. It seemed that the long journey had worn her out. Sitting on the floor of the vehicle, May and Odalina was helping Mark prepare for the next morning. They were loading the assault rifle magazines with ammunition while Mark was arranging the things he would bring in his backpack. You two should sleep already, Mark said to the two as he examined the M79 grenade launcher he would use later. Gerger, I'm fine. You're the one who should sleep already, May replied as she put away a magazine she just filled. That's right, Master, you should be the one to sleep already, since after you leave later, we still have time to rest. Odalina agreed with May. Well, I'm fine too if you two ask me. Mark looked at the time in his phone that was currently plugged and charging. It's just past 9 p.m. It is still early for me. Early? Master, just what time do you sleep normally? Around 3 or 4 in the morning. My clients on my freelance work were always from the US, so my work time was usually at night. If I'm not working, Then, I'm watching anime and playing video games. The two females were speechless. It was fine if it was work, but to spend almost the whole night at unnecessary things. If Mark was to know what the two were thinking about, he would sure reprimand the two. In front of Mark, he laid down the weapons he planned to use, the M16 assault rifle and the machete. The usual shotgun was not present though, as he replaced it with the grenade launcher. There was also the USC submachine gun. He planned to do a stealth mission and did not plan to confront the infected if possible. However, if the latter situation really happened, the shotgun would not help a lot. Even though the shotgun had a stronger punch than the assault rifle, its accuracy, range and reload speed was too slow. Furthermore, the grenade launcher was more suitable due to the large number of infected around. As for the submachine gun, he thought of using it replacing his pistol. Though it was a little heavier than the pistol, the additional weight should not hinder his movements. For the plan, Mark wanted to go alone and stealthily make his way towards his house. Confronting all those infected was surely suicide, and as such he thought of going over the roofs of the houses as the infected could not climb up. His house was also not intruded by the infected yet, as it was inside an alley and the gates was securely locked. Unless one could climb up the over 2-meter gates and walls, no one would be able to get inside. Finishing all the preparations they needed, Mark and the rest finally decided to sleep at past 11 in the evening. Mark did not manage to sleep peacefully though. While his mind was filled with thoughts keeping him away from sleep, he was also being plagued by his premonition for some reason. It was the first time for him to have a lingering dream like this that would appear in 2 consecutive days. ******** Day 5 to 4:02 a.m. Binga Lake Street, Lakeville Subdivision, Molino 7, Bacoor City, Cavite. Early at this time, Mark had already reached the back streets of the subdivision, approaching the street where his house was located several blocks away. Even though he slept quite late, he still woke out about 3 in the morning and prepared to depart. Even though the darkness of the night could impair his sight range, it should be the same for the infected as he observed back in the mall. Furthermore, with his all-black attire, it would be hard for anyone to make out his existence from a distance. It would be different for the mutated infected though, but the possibility of him encountering one at other locations aside from the area around his house would be close to none. As such, he was now 3 blocks away from his house. He was careful in his movements and was not making any noise despite the fact that he was moving fast. He was still not as fast as Odalina and Abigail, but still way faster than a normal person and even than a biter. Swish! Mark creeped behind a wandering eater and beheaded it with his machete. He prioritized in eliminating eaters than biters at this point. It was because he started to realize that the eaters were more adept at detecting people in the dark than biters. While the eater he beheaded had already fallen down, a biter nearby could not even make out Mark, who was standing beside the dead eater because of the darkness of the night. It also helped a lot that the moon had already set at this time. Maintaining his pace, he reached the corner of the street before his home street, Main at Lake Street. Here, he could finally see the large number of infected. The number of the infected here was smaller compared on the street he intended to go, but it was still too many for him to handle alone. Not wanting to get spotted, he jumped over the wall of the nearest house several lots away, as the corner of the street was nothing but a vacant lot. Feeling that there was some that saw him, he immediately jumped off the top of the wall and onto the terrace just above the gates of the house. He then lied down on the floor of the terrace, hiding from anyone's sight below. There were several infected that noticed a shadow moving over the wall and immediately ran towards the shadow's direction, but they did not see anyone and went back to their idle behavior. As he managed to shirk away from the sight of the infected, he felt relieved. It would be a problem if the infected started banging on the gates of the house he entered. Crouching, he saw the infected that saw him walk away. He immediately propelled himself towards the rooftop terrace of the house without anyone detecting him. High up the rooftop of the 2nd floor, he could barely see the infected at the distance, but he could make out the large number of infected at the close vicinity on the next street behind the house. Seeing his next stop, he slowly hung himself off the rooftop onto the roof of the 1-floor house beside. He did not jump off and slowly made his way as to not make any loud noise. Jumping onto roofs of houses was one of the noisiest things to do in a stealth mission due to the roofs being made of metal sheets. It was not like in some movies where the characters barely made any noise after even falling off unbalanced onto a metal roof. Making his way over 3 more houses, he was getting closer and closer to his goal. The problem now was how he was going to cross the infested street. Looking around, could make out the van crashed onto one of the houses near the end of the street. He saw it before using the drone and was looking for the right place to reach it. It seemed that whoever the owner of that van tried to flee but failed miserably. Mark then made his way several houses further away from his house. When he could finally see the van, he saw how the van was damaged. The door of the driver's seat was flung into the street while every single window of the van was entirely broken. He could also make out several large dents on the body of the vehicle, making it obvious that the one that attacked the van was a mutated infected with super strength. Luckily for Mark though, as this vehicle would be his ticket to get on the block where his house was located. The van was after all crashed onto the wall of the house in front and its body was almost blocking the entire street. With a single jump from the roof of the closest house, he could make it onto the roof of the van and onto the house on the next block. TSST, 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 TSST. Lying prone on the roof of the house, he waited for the right timing. He also took the opportunity to shoot several dozers that were idling far away, riddling their bodies with holes. The dozers became agitated as they could not find where the attacks were coming from and due to the pain they were feeling in their bodies. The noises the dozers made also attracted the attention of the infected around. Mark finally had the right timing. He stood up before making a running start and jumped onto the roof of the van in a swift manner. The jump was about 3 meters away, but he made it safely. After landing on the roof of the van, he did not stop and continued running until he jumped off to the wall of the house in front of the van before propelling himself to the roof. Many infected around saw him as a moving shadow, but what could they do? They could only make noise as he strayed away from their sights. Mark started to feel a bit elated as he was going closer and closer to his house. With all the infected around, it would be unlikely that there would be any looter that managed to get into his house, so he was not worried about his things being stolen. With his house being at the innermost side of the alley, he managed to make his way without making his presence known to the infected at the main streets. Furthermore, the disturbance made by the dozers he shot earlier strayed the attention of the infected further away from him. Finally, he reached his house. Stepping on the roof of his home, he checked the yard for any odd change but did not find any. The gates and walls were fully intact and the doors were the same. The house looked the same as he left it days before. Fetching, he jumped down from the roof and unlocked the door. He then entered the loneliest home he could ever have. A home where there was no one to welcome him back. He lived alone under this roof, doing his best at everything he could do. But no one would praise him for anything that he had done right. It was because he was all alone. The only things he had with him were his hobbies. His collection of goods that was very few in number and his collection of soft copies that had accumulated over the years. He did not have a collection of manga or light novels displayed on a shelf and did not have a large display of action figures. It was overly expensive for him to buy those things from overseas. What he had was a few robot models he painstakingly saved money for and a few anime figures that he won from several conventions before that he painstakingly attended and bought from surplus stores by luck. He wanted to bring them all with him or else he would feel that his existence for the past several years was nothing but a lie. Day 5 to 4:32 a.m. Lake Avenue, Lakeville Subdivision, Molino 7, Bacoor City, Cavite. After Mark had left under everyone's worried eyes, they started the task they were assigned with. It was to set up traps along their escape route in case the worst scenario happened. The traps were not that complicated. Most of the traps only consisted of ropes that went across the street to trip the infected once they ran over. The only complicated and the most deadly one was the trap Mark prepared before and was to be set up at the exit of the subdivision. It was a nylon cord with both ends of the cord tied onto the pins of 3 pairs of grenades. The grenades were to be tightly stuck on posts at the side of the exit of the subdivision, and once the nylon cord was pulled, the grenades would surely blow off along with everything near it. Once they were done with the traps, they would be ready to pick up Mark on call. While some of them were installing the traps, Odalina was training the others how to use weapons. It was obvious that they would attract unwanted attention during this activity, and it was also the same chance for them to train fighting the infected. As most of them were just beginners in wielding weapons and fighting, Odalina, May and Abigail would eliminate the biters that were more dangerous in close quarters, while Amika would regulate the number of eaters that would approach the trainees. Laylaps, on the other hand, was guarding the whole group, alerting everyone where the infected would be coming from, especially with the tall grasses around them. Shinn. Wielding a katana, Carlo begrudgingly beheaded the eater he was confronting. It was obvious that he was not proficient in using the Japanese sword, as his clumsiness was showing in his attacks. He also looked squeamish as the blood of the infected in front of him splashed on the ground. The katana he was wielding was a sword that his grandfather received after killing a Japanese general during the World War II. The evidence that the katana belonged to a general was the ornamental gems embedded on the hilt of the katana. This sword was one of the things he retrieved from his abandoned house. The katana was left for him along with the letter, as he would need a good weapon in order to survive. Day 5 to 4:43 a.m. Tall Lake Street, Lakeville Subdivision, Molino 7, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark was almost done with packing the things he wanted to bring, while the important things he would leave behind were all put inside the bedroom. Even though the chances of it happening were very low, he would take back these things if the outbreak settled down in the future. He took all his prized possessions into a sports bag. What he brought with him was his favorite black hooded jacket, 3 robot plastic models, a Nendoroid figure, and 4 different sized stuffed toys. As for other things, he brought all the compact discs he had in his case, his several flash drives, and the hard drive of his laptop and computer. He could not bring his laptop anymore, as it was too bulky and it had lower specs compared to the laptops he took from the mall. It was the same for his computer. Unfortunately, there was no way that he would be able to bring his only console. It was a bulky PlayStation 3 that he luckily bought in a surplus shop at a very large discount, along with several game discs. If the infected outside were not around, he might have a chance to bring this away, but unfortunately now, he would not be able to. Now, the last and the most important thing, the jar with the crystals in it that was stored inside the closet. He removed everything he put above the jar to hide it before the item was revealed. This was why Mark was confused as to how that flash of light happened. The closet was tightly sealed and the jar was covered with clothes, and thus, that light should not be able to escape out of the house. After Mark finally took out the jar from the closet, he froze. It was because he could see that the double-terminated crystal was emitting a faint glow continuously. It was not like this before. Furthermore, there was an additional marble-sized crystal floating around it. What was stranger was that the color of the newer crystal was a way lighter compared to the others. He was not that confused, as he knew nothing about the crystals in the first place, but it still felt odd. However, he had no time to ponder about it now. He started to hear loud noises outside the house the moment he moved the glass jar. Mark hurriedly covered the jar with a thick blanket and stuffed it inside his backpack, and not together with the other things he brought. The things inside the sports bag could still be tossed about to some extent, but not this one. He put the cloth-covered jar onto the bottom of the bag, moving away the grenade launcher shells stored in the middle of several handkerchiefs to prevent the shells from making noise as he ran about. Bam! 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 Mark subconsciously turned his head around towards the direction where the entrance to his house from the alley was located. It was because that loud sound was actually the gates of his house. Someone was banging the gates of his house in a violent manner. He hurriedly finished everything and ran out, locking his door once more. Using the hidden corner of his house, he tried to peek on the gates, and there, he saw the whole width of the gates was blocked with infected that was trying to get in. He could even see the gates shaking and hear the hinges creaking. It looked like that his act of taking the jar containing the crystals made the infected aware of its location. "I can't stay here any longer." Mark thought as he immediately propelled himself, kicking on the corner of the walls simultaneously, and jumped off onto the roof like a kung fu artist. He arrived on the roof of his house in an instant, however. Bam! He was not alone. A biter suddenly appeared in a curve through the air, falling onto the same roof he was standing on in an unsightly manner. "What?" Mark blurted in shock. Swish, swish, bam, bam. It was followed by two more landing on the roof in a random direction. Looking at the direction of the curve they fell, it seemed that these three were thrown up here. Swish, swish, bam, bam. While the three were recovering from the fall and Mark was in his thought, two more infected landed in front of him, with one infected even hitting the first one that appeared. Mark did not try to think anymore. He immediately bolted off. He knew that he had been discovered, and the one that was throwing these guys should be a mutated infected with super strength. It must be the same infected that mutilated the van he saw earlier. Jumping off from the roof of his house, he went towards the opposite direction he came from. Since he was now escaping, he needed to use the shortest route as he could. Furthermore, he was already discovered and would not be able to hide anymore. No, rather, he would not be able to hide even if he wanted to. Running across the lot of the house behind his where he jumped off, he intended to climb onto the next roof. He then noticed some movements above the walls he just jumped over. To his horror, he saw more than half a dozen heads popping over the almost 3-meter wall, followed by arms and then their torso. One by one, the infected fell off over the wall. The damn infected were actually climbing up the walls. Plop, 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 plop. Bodies continued to pour down from the wall just behind him. He did not try to dawdle and hurriedly jumped towards another wall, jumping over it and then onto the roof of a classroom inside a small private school located just one lot away from his house, continuing towards the roof of his neighbor. As he was now in an open area, he could finally see what was happening nearby. The biters on the vicinity was climbing over every obstacle they could climb over to reach him, while the eaters were behaving the same as normal but also following the direction the biters were going. He also saw the creature that was throwing infected at him. It should be a biter that mutated, as it was moving fast. Its body was bulky. Different from the large hulking infected he saw before, this one was not tall, but it had firm-looking muscles and there was not a trace of fat that could be seen from its body. What Mark was surprised about this infected was because he knew the person. He was one of his neighbors that did not frequent gyms but still had a body filled of muscles for some reason. Mark thought before if that neighbor of his had a myostatin-related disorder, and now, it really seemed to be the case. The mutagen even strengthened that characteristic of his neighbor further. As it was almost 5 in the morning, the sky had started to brighten. As such, Mark was looking at the scene below while the infected was also looking at him. Bam! Bam! 2 more infected was thrown onto the roof he was standing on. Furthermore, the biters were also starting to climb onto the same roof. They were even making a ladder made of their own bodies, like how it was in a blockbuster zombie movie that aired in theaters several years ago. Well, the situation is just getting worse and worse. Mark helplessly muttered. TSST, TSST. Mark put down his sports bag and shot the 2 infected that had just been thrown onto the roof with his assault rifle. He then faced the muscle-packed infected and shot it with several bullets. However, before the bullets could hit the mutated infected, it pulled an eater beside it and used it as a shield, avoiding getting hit by the bullets Mark fired. It then threw the infected towards the Mark, making him dodge to the side and stop shooting. Mark frowned. The mutant infected he was facing right now was smart for sure. No, not just that mutated infected. The normal biters in the area seemed to be smarter too. Furthermore, the biters and mutated infected that were behaving strangely were only the ones in the close vicinity of his house. He could see that the infected further away were still behaving as usual. He then remembered the crystals inside his backpack. Every time he's at home, he would feel his mind relaxed ever since he found these crystals, and it even aided him to be able to concentrate on his freelance online work and with playing video games. The infected gathered here could have been affected by the crystals for sure. There was no doubt about it. Turning back to the muscle mutant, Mark's eyes dilated. He immediately picked up his sports bag on the roof, ignoring everything else. It was because he saw the muscle mutant picking up a dozer, intending to throw it at his direction. Mark jumped off the roof onto the roof of another neighboring house. Blom mm. A loud sound echoed behind him as the 2-meter-tall dozer slammed onto the roof after being thrown. Mark glanced behind and saw the roof where he stood before was dented, with the dozer sunk at the center of the dent, struggling to get out. On the further side of that roof, he could see the biters finally managed to climb up to the roof and started running towards him. Due to the roof Mark now stood on was about 2 meters away from the previous roof, he expected the biters to fall off, but he was gravely mistaken. The infected that reached the edge of that roof started jumping towards the roof he stood on. Most of them still fell off due to the wrong timing and being pushed by ones behind, but there were several ones that made it and continued running towards him. Mark then shot the biters that managed to jump over the gap between the roof of the two houses without panicking. But that was not the end of it. Ba-amm. With a loud sound, he saw the muscled figure landing on the roof of the neighboring roof he was previously on. Day 5 to 4:55 a.m. Tall Lake Street, Lakeville Subdivision, Molino 7, Bacoor City, Cavite. TSST, 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 TSST. The moment Mark saw the muscled infected suddenly appear on the roof, he did not dawdle and rained bullets towards the direction of the infected. Nevertheless, the shots failed to hit its target, with the muscled infected immediately kicking the roof with a loud bam and disappearing into the interior of the house. Mark frowned as this was getting troublesome. Still, Mark did not plan to leave yet. If he was not discovered, he would have continued moving undetected, but with all the infected that was now climbing onto the roof and chasing him, it was impossible to do so. Thus, he planned to attract the attention of all the infected into this area before fleeing towards the main road. If he succeeded, there would be no infected that would block his way as he flee, and all the infected should come from behind. However, the existence of the muscled infected was posing a threat to him in addition to these abnormal infected. He could even make out dozers and other oddly looking infected trying to climb the walls, but the shapes and weight of their bodies were preventing them from doing so. Bam! Crush! Mark heard a loud sound below, making him look down, and saw the wall of the house where the muscled infected enter crumble into debris. From that hole made on the wall, the threatening figure of the muscled infected appeared, looking at him. He immediately shot, but the target immediately ran off towards the area that Mark could not see. TSST, 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 TSST. Knowing that he would not be able to shoot that cunning infected, Mark released a barrage of bullets towards the biters that were now running towards his direction after climbing the roof. Annoying. Mark voiced his irritation. More and more infected started to climb up the roof. Mark estimated that the infected that was affected by the crystal should be around 1,000, with most of them being the biters. The eaters that were affected did not matter much as they were not able to move too fast. Still, the eaters also started to climb up the roof at their own pace. Mark looked around the street and saw that the infected further away, the direction he intended to run towards, started to move towards this direction. Now, he just needed to wait a little bit more time while trying to evade the assault of the infected on the roof. Releasing the assault rifle from his hands, he readied the grenade launcher. It pained him to use this weapon due to the number of the ammunition he had being limited with just around 50 40mm grenade shells, and he could only bring 20 of the shells with him due to the bulky size of the shells. It was everything of what he retrieved from the gang back in Firenze. Still, it was no wonder that the number of ammunition they carried for the grenade launcher was limited. It was because it was not a gun to be used by beginners. The gang members did not even try to use it back then and relied on their semi-automatic and automatic guns. It also looked like that the gang members did not know that the grenade shells they were carrying were the highly explosive ones, or else they would have easily won against the police by using it. Mark retreated away as he aimed the grenade launcher on the part of the roof where the biters were climbing. It was where the highest concentration of the climbing infected was gathered. Thump. Boom. Then launched shell flew in a small parabola and fell a little bit off to his target. Even if Mark was used to using this kind of gun in simulation games and FPS games, it was still different in using it in real life. Still, the explosion created on the roof blew away some infected climbing and heavily damaged the roof, leaving a large hole. After shooting, he immediately opened the chamber and removed the empty shell and threw it away. Though the shell casings might be able to be reused, Mark did not have the capability to recycle them. Reloading the grenade launcher, he aimed once more on his target and adjusted his aim. However, he suddenly turned his aim down to the ground and fired. Thump. Boom. The grenade exploded just to the wall of the house in front of him. Roar. The explosion was immediately followed by a loud, painful roar. It was the muscled infected that was about to attack once more, but was met with the explosion of the grenade that landed in front of it. Mark had been noticing that this mutated infected was dodging every single shot he made towards it. He also noticed that before he could even fire the first shot, this infected was already on the move to evade. What bothered him was that the infected obviously had no capability to think and was obviously all relying on their instincts. This meant that it should not be able to realize that he was going to shoot it, yet it was evading his attacks. Then it dawned to him while he was shooting the other infected. Animals and insects could recognize things that could threaten them, and the muscled infected seemed to be displaying the same behavior to his weapons. And for the muscled infected to predict when he was going to shoot, it was also similar to animals and insects. The moment that they feel threatened, they would immediately flee. When does that happen? Even though animals and insects would always flee no matter what most of the time, there was a time that they desperately do so. It was when they feel killing intent from the opposing party. Noticing that the muscled infected could feel his killing intent towards it, Mark turned his attention to the biters climbing on the roof, redirecting his killing intent towards the new target. When he was about to shoot for the second time, he saw that the muscled infected below started to move, and as such, he changed his target and shot before his killing intent was felt by the muscled infected. For the result, Mark finally injured the cunning guy. Bam! Crush! Another sound of concrete crumbling down as the muscled infected destroyed another wall of the opposite house and entered the house in a hurry. As it ran into the house, Mark saw a glimpse of the muscled infected and saw its body riddled with bloody wounds and with its right arm charred and bleeding heavily. Since the threat lessened, Mark reloaded the grenade launcher once more and fired at the area where the infected were climbing. Thump. Boom. Several painful roars and screams echoed afterwards as the ladder made of the bodies of the infected crumbled down, with many biters severely wounded. Mark looked back at the street and saw that most of the infected was now gathered around here, with just eaters lagging behind. He then decided to move as the muscled infected had already retreated. He ran from roof to roof and jumped from gap to gap. He was now using his submachine gun as it was inconvenient to run around while firing and reloading the grenade launcher. He continued to shoot the numerous infected behind that still managed to catch up due to their never-ending stamina and speed. Even though Mark's body had evolved and was enhanced due to the mutagen in the air, his energy was not inexhaustible. As such, the continuous running and jumping was starting to take a toll on his body. Furthermore, he was carrying his things and his weapons, adding the weight to his expended stamina. Reaching the roof of another house, Mark stopped. It was because the next area was a vacant lot being used as a pathway midway the block. The next house was 2 lots away, and there was a lot of infected that was still wandering the vacant lots. Ta. Mark rained all the remaining ammo in the clip of his submachine gun towards the infected chasing him. With the infected closer behind him dying, he hung the submachine gun back to his side after reloading it and pulled out the grenade launcher once more. He also took out 2 grenades stored in the pockets on his belt. He pulled the pins and threw the grenades on the vacant lot in different distances before taking cover. Boom! Boom! The grenades exploded amidst the infected, creating a gap in the center of the infected on the vacant lot. Mark then aimed the grenade launcher on the area further where the grenades exploded and fired it with the same time he jumped down from that roof. Boom! The grenade shell exploded before he could even land, stretching the gap between the infected further. Mark could smell the gunpowder and smoke and feel the heat that had yet to dissipate from the radius of the grenade explosion as he landed. He then pulled his submachine gun once more and started shooting the infected that were now trying to attack him around. Using the gap left by the 3 explosions, he managed to reach the end of the vacant lot almost immediately. He then jumped up onto another wall and towards the roof of the next house. Mark continued running on the roofs, aiming for the end of the street towards the main avenue. While he was running halfway of the whole block, he noticed that the biters on the street were starting to catch up. Even though Mark was faster, he had to avoid a lot of obstacles on the roof, such as cables, 2 slanted surfaces, antenna posts and the gaps between houses, making him reduce his speed. The infected running on the street, however, only had some parked vehicles and the straggling eaters blocking their way. Still, Mark could not jump down towards the street as he was still the area where a lot of infected was still wandering around. The area of the street that was already cleared of the infected was still further away. As he neared the final alleys separating the inner and outer area of the block, he noticed something making him look up to the sky. He could feel an unusual fluctuation. An emotional fluctuation he had never felt before. Obviously it was not human and also was not an animal. As the sky had already started to brighten, he could make out a number of shadows flying in the sky about 7 meters from the ground. There was one leading the shadows and behind it was several shadows following it. After Mark got closer, he heard buzzing sounds that immediately made the hair on his nape stood up. It made him conclude, what are those shadows, and he could not help but frown. However, something was not right. Mark could feel the fluctuation from the leading shadow in the sky but not on the shadows following it. Another roof closer, Mark could now make out the appearance of the shadows. The leading shadow was actually a beetle that was blackish red in color. Looking at the shape, Mark concluded that it was a coconut rhinoceros beetle common in this country. However, its size was huge, about the size of a full-grown adult's torso, and it had 4 horns on its head and thorax. The ones following behind the beetle, however, was something that could give anyone goosebumps and was the main source of the sound Mark was hearing at the moment. Mark could not help but aim his gun seeing that group. The group of shadows behind the beetle was actually human head-sized cockroaches. There were about 15 of them and they all could fly. Despite the disgust Mark was feeling towards the cockroaches, the beetle, however, made his eyes gleam. He wanted to catch that beetle. Now that he was closer, he could now make out the fluctuation from the beetle more clearly. The fluctuation was kind of bizarre, maybe because it was an insect, but what made Mark interested was the fact that it has the same pattern of subconscious thought to Abigail and the mutators in his group. It meant that the rhinoceros beetle was mutator and a successful one at that. However, Mark could not help but also feel a bit disappointed. It was because he could detect the reigning emotion in the subconscious of that beetle, and it was no wonder why such an aggressive kind of insect seemed to be running away from a group of infected cockroaches. It was because it was actually afraid. The reigning emotion on the mind of the beetle was fear. Nevertheless, it would make it easier for Mark to tame that beetle. Despite the fact that Mark was being chased from behind by the infected, his gamer instinct still kicked in. He wanted to catch it. It was a pity that balls that could catch monsters did not exist in real life. Mark jumped off the roof across the alley, reinforcing his feet with adrenaline to jump further and faster. He wanted to catch up to the flying insects and tame the beetle before he escaped this place. With that, Mark readied his assault rifle and aimed at the cockroaches as he ran on the roofs. Day 5 to 5:08 a.m. Tall Lake Street, Lakeville Subdivision, Molino 7, Bacoor City, Cavite. It was already past 5 in the morning and the surroundings started to get brighter with the sunrise coming closer. From the sky, hundreds of silhouettes could be seen chasing behind Mark, who was still running from roof to roof. The sounds of the metal roofs being stepped on and the deafening hungry growls could be heard behind him. Yet, Mark was not bothered by them anymore as his attention was more focused at the insects flying in the sky. The fact that infected insects were still able to retain their ability to fly entered his mind, but he decided to pass on the problem for now. What mattered to him at this moment was to catch up to the flying figures. As Mark started to circulate the adrenaline in his body, he started to move faster and faster, making the infected chasing behind him lag too far behind. Still, it seemed that he was now not able to maintain this ability for too long. Since he had never used his self-induced adrenaline rush to this extent after he evolved for the second time, he did not realize this problem. Now, however, he was made aware because of the situation. It was not that he was feeling the backlash of using the adrenaline in his body, but it was that the amount of adrenaline was not enough anymore for his evolved body. It looked like he needed to increase his sugar intake in the future once he passed this danger. Nevertheless, with the short time of his adrenaline rush, he was able to make a large distance between him and the infected behind. With this, he had enough leeway to shoot the cockroaches. Finally closing in to a certain distance as the flying insects were also flying slightly parallel to the direction he was running towards, he started to aim his assault rifle. Given the distance of the insects from him and the distance of the insects from the ground, only his assault rifle could shoot the flying cockroaches with greater accuracy. TSST, 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 TSST. Bullets rained upwards to the sky, with all the bullets soaring towards the cockroaches. TSHK, 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 TSHK. Not all the bullets hit the cockroaches, but it was no doubt that most of the cockroaches in that group received damage. It was because Mark saw the cockroaches sway in the air before plummeting downwards. There were those who still remained in flight despite getting hit with the bullets. It was because their bodies were hit and not their wings. The first ones to fall actually did not receive many wounds on their bodies, but their wings were damaged by the bullets, and the fast pace of their flapping wings further tore their wings into pieces, causing their fall. Pang! 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 8 of the cockroaches created metal sounds as they fell onto the roof of a house further away before their bodies bounced off everywhere. Due to the speed of their flight, the height and direction of their fall, the cockroaches ended up bouncing off the roof and scattered towards to the street. Nevertheless, cockroaches were cockroaches. Even after falling like that and their bodies being drilled with holes, they were still alive. The cockroaches that fell upside down immediately propped themselves up by holding onto anything around them, while some flapped their wings wildly. The cockroaches that managed to recover from the fall immediately saw the numerous infected and Mark the infected were chasing on the roof. Obviously, the cockroaches immediately went towards Mark's direction, climbing over every obstacle in a very fast speed. 5 of the fallen cockroaches went towards Mark, while the 3 remaining cockroaches, however, went haywire in the middle of the street. It looked like their heads were damaged, if not by the bullets, it should be because of their fall. Mark saw the fallen cockroaches running his way and frowned, as the direction they were coming from was the direction he was going to. The cockroaches were moving even faster than the infected behind him and were surely hard to shoot due to their sizes. Buzz. Mark heard a loud buzzing sound, making him look up. Even without looking up, Mark knew where that buzzing sound came from. The sound was from the wings of the coconut rhinoceros beetle that was being flapped in supersonic speeds. What was wrong, however? The beetle was now flying towards him madly. While Mark was dealing with the other things and running, he was racking his brains for any method to catch this oversized beetle. Who knew that it would turn out this way and the beetle would flew towards him on its own? Furthermore, it had no intent to harm him, and instead, it seemed to have found its savior. Nevertheless, despite the fact that the beetle was flying towards him, he did not dare stood on its way. Mark sidestepped and the beetle passed by swiftly where his body was before. The beetle was flying at a very fast speed. With its size and the horns on its front, if Mark tried to clash with it head-on, TSHK, his body would turn out like the head of the biter a few meters behind him on the previous roof he was on that tried to catch the flying beetle. Squashed like a watermelon. The beetle was not an infected and was surely become a target to the infected behind. Seeing that the infected started to chase it, the beetle came to comical stop mid-air and flew back towards Mark's direction. Now that its momentum was slower, Mark grabbed its longest and topmost horn without hesitation as it got near him. With its horn being grabbed like that, it tried to protest, but Mark was not in the time to bother with it. The goosebumps-inducing buzzing sounds was getting near, making Mark grab his submachine gun. He then emptied half of the clip to shoot the incoming cockroaches that went flying after the beetle. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. The loud sounds of the gun echoed once more as the submachine gun was not equipped with a suppressor. The gunshots were soon followed by the cockroaches plummeting in an angle towards Mark's direction. Mark ran with the beetle on his left hand while dodging the falling cockroaches. The beetle struggled to break free, swinging its legs as wildly as possible, but it could only give up with a pitiful look. The horn Mark grabbed was too long for it to reach with its legs, and with Mark's strengthened arms, it would not be able to break free. Not to mention that the beetle was already tired flying after getting chased by the cockroaches for who knows how long. If it was in its best condition, it would surely be able to escape from Mark's grasp just by flapping its wings. Still, it did give up struggling, not because it could not escape, but because it did not feel any ill intent from Mark. Tink. Swish. Mark swung his machete towards the cockroach that jumped in front of him. The blade of the machete felt some resistance, but it still managed to tear through the exoskeleton of the cockroach. White blood splattered as the cockroach was slashed in half. At that moment, another cockroach jumped towards him and he attacked it the same way. As Mark swung his machete towards the second cockroach, another one suddenly jumped towards him at a faster speed. Without much choice and with his machete halfway swung, he could only smash what he was holding in his left hand towards the cockroach. Unfortunately, the thing in his left hand was the pitiful beetle, and it was swung downwards with great momentum. Pigshk. The infected cockroach was smashed into meat paste. It was too unexpected that Mark reflexively jumped away to avoid the white blood that splattered away from the body of the squashed cockroach. Mark also missed his attack towards the other one. Mark did not dawdle and continued running away, but could not help but glance at the beetle on his hand with incredulity. It had such a strong exoskeleton, but it was actually afraid of these cockroaches? On his hand, the coconut rhinoceros beetle was on the verge of crying. It was a pet beetle and was not afraid of people. It had been a pet ever since it came out of its pupa. It got infected because it was swallowed whole by its owner that had already turned, submerging it with saliva and stomach acid. It was too afraid after that happened. Nevertheless, it mutated almost immediately, tearing the body of its owner apart due to its size. Due to its abrupt mutation, it gained a bit of sentience. It knew that something dangerous was happening, and as such, it buried itself under the ground these past days. However, last night, it was found by a group of large cockroaches that dug the place where it hid. Because it was afraid, it immediately flew away in the middle of the night, but the cockroaches followed behind it. When it saw this person shooting the cockroaches behind it, it was elated and flew straight towards that human. But the human dodged and it impaled the head of the scary people, making it rush back. When it was grabbed, it gave up soon as it felt no danger from the person holding its horn. But it never expected that the person would use its body as a weapon. The beetle was really about to cry. Another time, and it really would. Squeak. Mark was about to swing the beetle once more towards another cockroach when it squeaked in protest while wildly swinging its spiny legs. Due to its protest, Mark used his machete against the incoming cockroach. It was the first time that Mark actually felt an emotional fluctuation coming from an insect, so he could not guess what it was thinking aside from the faint similarity of its fear to how human and animal fear was. However, it was not hard to guess its protest from being used as a weapon. He was now approaching the end of the street. Mark tightly hung his sports bag around his shoulder and jumped off the roof. Now that he was running in the middle of the street, he pulled out the radio with his right hand. "Mayor, are you all ready?" Almost immediately, a reply came from the radio. "Gerger, we are already waiting. Are you returning already?" "I am. Prepare the vehicle and I'll be there soon. The large horde are just behind me, so we need to leave immediately." "Should we fetch you?" "No, I'll still be able to make it there, but if you guys fetch me, the car still needs to turn around so the infected will manage to catch up." "Why, yes. Mayer faltered. It seemed that she had the urge to fetch Mark as soon as he called, but her idea was immediately denied. Don't worry about me. I also found something interesting to show everyone. Just be ready to leave, I'll be there in a moment. Mark ended the call and slashed the remaining infected, blocking his way along with the cockroaches that easily caught up to him due to their fast speed. With the exception of Cielo and Anna, every adult inside the two vehicles was kind of worn out. It was the first time they fought the infected, making them tired both physically and mentally. Cielo did not participate due to her having panic attacks every time the infected closes onto her, while Anna was still not in good shape emotionally. The children also did not participate with the exception of Abigail and Amika, who were mutators. They all heard what Mark said in the radio and were now anticipating his return. Upon knowing about the crystals Mark spoke of yesterday, they were also interested to see the crystals. But they also heard that Mark was being chased by the horde and felt tense about it at the same time. What made them confused, however, was the happy tone Mark had when he said that he found something good to show them. Soon enough, they could see Mark running towards their direction in fast speed. He seemed tired and his speed was slower than before. Nevertheless, he was still faster than the infected. Everyone became wide-eyed, however, seeing the infected chasing behind him several meters away. The whole street and sidewalk was filled with infected running at full speed. Due to the overwhelming number of infected, that they did not notice the struggling oversized beetle on Mark's hand. Go! Mark yelled after he jumped into the door of the MB Sprinter. The two vehicles immediately drove off in full speed. Everyone felt tremors inside their vehicles as the road had broken and uneven parts due to being unmaintained, but they just ignored the tremors. What they needed to do now was leave the place as soon as possible. If the infected behind them managed to catch up, they would sure be overwhelmed. In less than 3 minutes, they reached the entrance of the subdivision. The traps they set up became very useful. Even though the ropes only tripped the first few infected in front of the horde, it was enough to cause a chain reaction and made the ones behind fall. They continued to drive out of the subdivision and heard a loud explosion behind them. The final trap was triggered, causing the grenades to explode. Dismembered bodies and blood flew into the air, causing the horde an abrupt stop. The sound and smoke from the explosion impaired the hearing and sight of the infected, making them lose track of the two vehicles. During that moment, the two vehicles made an abrupt turn to another street and sped off, getting away from the horde that lost their targets. Day 5 to 5:19 a.m. Tall Lake Street, Lakeville Subdivision, Molino 7, Bacoor City, Cavite. Everyone in Mark's group finally felt relived after crossing over the bridge that marked the boundary of the subdivision they had just exited and onto the next one. The feeling of being chased by hundreds or even thousands of infected was suffocating, even with the fact that they were inside their vehicles. As they finally lost their pursuers, everyone started to calm down from their tenseness. Well, except for Mark, Abigail and May, that did not seem worried about the infected chasing behind in the first place. Laylaps being not nervous was one thing since she was a dog, but these three. Even Mark, who was the person that was initially being chased, was not showing any fear at all, and rather, he was even looking happy. The others did not know what to think of them anymore. Papa, what is that? Abigail pointed at the huge insect now lying down in the floor. It obviously looked like a large beetle, but why her papa would bring this here, and it was not moving at all. The little girl then crouched down beside the huge beetle, poking it cautiously. Everyone inside the vehicle heard the little girl turning their attention to the large insect Mark brought into the vehicle. The beetle was too large that it actually occupied the width between the seats on both sides as it lay on the floor horizontally. Mark, who had just started to relax his tired legs, also stared this coconut rhinoceros beetle he luckily caught incredulously. The others might not know about it, but this guy was too scared that it stopped moving and played dead on the floor of the vehicle. It even lay on its back with its legs tightly crossed on its abdomen. It was scared due to the fact that there were many people inside the vehicle. The women felt a little uneasy with a very huge bug like that, especially Anna, who seemed to have forgotten about her grief, trying to stay away the oversized beetle as much as possible. It looked really ridiculous as she could not back away too much either as she would push Sandra and Carlo that sat beside her towards the back of the vehicle where Jeanette was tied up. Gerger, this is? Even though May seemed to be not afraid of the beetle at all, she also looked confused. Her Gerger after all went home to get his things. Just where did this huge bug come from? As everyone was looking at him asking for explanation, Mark could tell them. Well, you guys probably won't believe me, but this beetle here is a mutator. Hearing that, everyone was shocked. Even bugs can become mutators? Charmaine voiced in askance. It's not really far-fetched though, since we had a mutator dog there. Mark pointed at the back where Laylaps was curled up. She was not really sleeping, but it just seemed that she was uneasy riding inside the vehicle, being the reason for her to behave this way most of the time. Now that Mark mentioned it, it was really not far-fetched for a bug to be a mutator, since a dog could become one, but it was just they had not thought of the possibility. But how did you manage to catch it? Melissa asked as she curiously looked at the bug that was not moving even a little bit. Its body was actually moving, but the movements came from the vehicle and not made the bug itself. To her question, Mark replied, I don't know if you can consider what happened as catching. Mark then narrated what happened before he caught the beetle. What Mark emphasized in his story was the behavior of the beetle, but the people listening to him were more alerted by the fact of a group of human head-sized infected cockroaches existing. Not only the females but Roland and Carlo also shivered to that thought. By the way, Master, since we are talking about it, why does it seem that we never see or encounter infected insects and animals before? I know that Laylaps was infected before becoming a mutator, and the cat at the city hall is not an infected but an evolved one. But except those two, we never encountered infected ones or other evolved ones. Since it was already on topic, Odalina could not help but ask. Ever since they left the mall, they never encountered infected or evolved animals and insects with the exception of Laylaps and the huge cat. They saw carcass and bones on the road belonging to some animals, but that was it. As Odalina asked, Mark sighed. With those infected cockroaches suddenly appearing, Mark thought that it was really a bad sign. It was already the 5th day of the outbreak, and to say, the survivor chase should already be over on the 3rd day in this part of the country. Mark leaned his body on the backrest of his seat and decided to talk about it. Odal, about your question, I have the answer, though it might be a little off. Should not be that far away from what is happening. Everyone's attention was now gathered at him. He was the most knowledgeable here about zombies and such due to his hobbies and intelligence. He would surely have a good explanation for this. This should be what happened. Animals and insects, if you put them on the same size as a human, they are far superior in strength and capabilities. No, not even comparing, but animals and insects are still faster compared to how fast people normally move. It is not impossible that they will retain those characteristics after being infected, and as such, it was more likely for them to chase after the large number of fleeing people. That is why we, who are left here in the middle of the infested area, did not encounter them. It is also possible that most of them died due to the characteristics of mutagen. Then Gerger, they are the same as the infected that came chasing after the feeling people? May asked, making Mark nod before continuing. As for the evolved animals and insects, also the still normal ones, they should have fled already towards forests and mountains to seek shelter, since the populated areas are already brimming with infected and danger. The huge cat we encountered back in the city hall maybe remained because of the fruit Mikio made. As the evolved animals and insects still had not turned or got bitten, they will surely become target for the infected. Everyone was enlightened to his conjecture. It was really possible for it to happen. May, however, seemed to have realized a pressing matter. Gerger, the cockroaches you said, the wave is already coming back? That's right. Mark agreed with a serious expression. What is this wave thing you two are talking about? Melissa voiced in displeasure. They were talking about the animals and insects, but suddenly, these two talked about something incomprehensible to them, like waves and stuff. Is there a high tide somewhere? To her displeasure, Mark turned to her and asked, in the ocean, what happens to the wave after it hit the shore? Melissa was confused about the question. Not only her but also the others, but she could only answer due to Mark's stare. It goes back to the ocean, right? Melissa answered as it was the obvious answer. Then, what if the country is the ocean and the infected chasing after the survivors are the waves? What will happen after they hit the shore now? Boom! As if a thunder struck the minds of everyone inside the vehicle, their thoughts crumbled and their emotions shook violently. Just now, May asked if the wave was already coming back and Mark affirmed it. It was not hard for them to understand what was happening. Looking at everyone's expressions, Mark sternly said, "That is why we needed to hurry up and finish everything. Actually, I wanted to find a few more people, but we don't have the time to look for them anymore. I don't know where to look for them either. That is why we should finish everything today or until tomorrow at most and leave this place." No one disagreed to what Mark said. Everyone here was already briefed why there are very few infected compared to the actual population in this area. Considering the numbers that was missing, the number of infected going back should be overwhelming. That was not something their small group of theirs could handle. Not to mention that the only ones who could effectively fight the infected was Mark, Abigail, Odalina, Laylaps and Amika. While the others were slowly coping as they were being trained to fight, the very short time and experience they had was not enough. This was a very serious situation for them now. Luckily, the only ones whose families they needed to find left were only Roland's and Rosamie's. As for Sundra's family, they were out of town for vacation. She was left due to her work and would just follow for the holiday break that would never happen anymore. Furthermore, Mark already told them that they would pass by some houses of people he knew but was not sure if they were still there, and if they did not find any clue about their whereabouts, they would not bother to look either. While everyone was contemplating about the current circumstances, Mark took out something inside his backpack with a lot of care. Revealing the thing, everyone was fascinated and immediately forgot what they were currently thinking. What Mark took out was the jar containing the floating crystals. The scene was already amazing, but the current glow the double-terminated crystal was emitting further enhanced the fantastical scene. Initially, Mark was kind of worried that they would become target of the infected after he brought these crystals away, but when he saw that not all the infected back around his home was attracted to him who was carrying the crystal, he felt relieved. He concluded that the only ones that could feel the crystals were those who were exposed to its energy being emitted. Furthermore, after closing the door of the vehicle when they were being chased, he saw that the aggressiveness of the infected that had been affected by the crystal lessened, making him think that thick armor and soundproofing of the vehicle sealed the energy the crystals were emitting. "Gerger, in the picture you showed us, it's not glowing, right?" "Yeah. I'm also confused with this. Also another crystal appeared but has a different color. It's also purplish but a little fainter." Everyone looked at the crystals in the jar and immediately saw the odd one out of all the smaller crystal. "Papa," Abigail called out while staring at the crystals. "What is it?" "The crystal from the huge cat, same color." Abigail pointed at the faint-colored crystal. Actually, Mark also felt the color of the new marble-sized crystal a little familiar but could not remember where he saw it. Now that his daughter mentioned it, he immediately took out the crystal from the huge cat that Mikio gave him before. He had been keeping it inside the small strap bag he had tightly covered inside a folded handkerchief. It was also the same for the strange-looking seed. Holding the crystal in his hand, he compared it with the marble-sized crystal inside the jar. There, everyone could see that aside from the shape, everything looked similar. The color, the turbidity and even the feeling Mark could feel from the crystals was the same. "Don't tell me this is what I think it is," Mark thought in his mind as they compared the two crystals. If he was not mistaken, then these crystals were the crystallization of mutagen. Pretty much similar to the fruit Mikio could create using the mutagen in the air when he was in the form of a huge tree. This line of though made him think of several experiments. He also wanted to know if the double-terminated crystal would continue of producing the original crystals yearly or would continue on producing the newer crystals, or maybe, both. Mark's eyes suddenly landed on Jeanette, who was fixatedly staring at the jar containing the crystals in his hands. The vividly colored crystals could affect the mind, and the same circumstances also applied to the infected. In that case, what if he made Jeanette absorb one? This line of thought of his seemed to be a bit dangerous, but nevertheless, he had the urge to try no matter what. While he was thinking all those things and everyone was looking at him with strange expressions, the group made their way towards their next destination, Barangay Queens Row Area A. This was where Roland's and his family's house was located. It was also home for several people Mark wanted to locate if possible. The sun started to rise and the warm sunlight started to dissipate the cold breeze of the night and illuminated the road Mark and his group was passing through. However, it seemed both grief and surprise was awaiting them in their destination. While the forgotten beetle, however, was still playing dead while swaying on the floor of the moving vehicle. Day 5 to 6:07 a.m. Queens Main Avenue, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Two vehicles entered through the gates, finally stepping into Barangay Queens Row Area A. Along the way, they encountered quite a number of infected, but as there was no need to bother with these infected, they just drove past by them. Many parts of the main street were littered with abandoned cars, but the two vehicles drove around them without any difficulty. Everyone was looking outside the vehicle, watching the devastation left by the apocalypse. As Roland lived here and Mark, Carlo, Sandra, Charmaine and Celo attended college here, they were familiar with the place. The college had been relocated somewhere else years ago, and aside from Mark, the others also went there, but their first college location was still in this barangay. Their former campus, though, after the college moved, was annexed by the elementary school beside it. In their memories, this place was lively, and while not filled with people, there were still a lot of people wandering around, especially students, as several schools were located nearby. Now, however, while they were still seeing students, they were all infected already. The convenience store that just passed by seemed to be looted clean, with its glass walls fully shattered. The gates of the houses almost everywhere were smeared with blood, and rotting remains of decapitated dead bodies could be seen in the middle of the road. To say, this place was one of the central areas in eastern Bacoor. As such, several elementary and secondary high schools, commercial establishments and other places of interest could be found here, especially along the main roads. Now, however, almost everything was already bathed in blood and violence. It was one of the places that took the most damage in this part of Bacoor. Turning at the first corner to the right of the main avenue, they traversed the last stretch of road before the street where Roland's house was located. The street where he lived was at the last branching street of this one. Obviously, Roland started to get nervous. Similar to Carlo and Anna's situation before, he did not know what to expect. He wished that his family was still alive, but he could not get the thought of the other possibility out of his mind. After all, Anna had experienced it. Though she did not see her family because Mark prevented her from doing so, the pain she felt was deep. What more if she saw her family's current state? Roland, however, wanted to see no matter what. He was stranded at an auto repair shop when the outbreak came several days ago, along with several people. To find food and water to survive, they lost a few more. It was until they took the gamble and went towards the sounds of gunshot they heard around the area while riding the passenger van that was about to leave the garage before the outbreak came. They were fortunate to find the police, and he was even luckier to find Mark. With what Roland experienced in the span of 5 days, he could not imagine what kinds of things his family had gone through. Making another turn right, they were greeted by a closed steel fence gate blocking the street. Still, it seemed that this fence gate was of no use at all, as they could see traces of blood on the other side of the fence. There were also no signs of people around. Mark alighted from the vehicle along with Abigail and Laylaps to check if they would be able to open the fence gate. Mark went and checked the bar latched on the center and the gate and saw that it was actually not locked. Mark passed his arm through the narrow space next to the latch and opened the fence gate with a little twist and push. As Roland's house was just a few blocks away, Mark and the two did not enter back into the vehicle. Roland, who could not wait anymore, also alighted from the vehicle. The two vehicles passed through the fence gates and Mark closed the gates afterwards. Observing the area, the two vehicles matched the pace the people outside the vehicle walked. After passing by 6 houses, they reached the house where Roland's family lived. The next house further was the house where Roland and his girlfriend lived together. To say, it seemed that the houses did not escape the infected. The walls and gates were smeared with blood and the glass windows of the house of Roland's family were all broken down. Standing outside the gates, Mark's nose twitched. It was because he could smell the faint pungent odor in the air. Normal people might not be able to notice it immediately, but he who was an evolver with enhanced senses could. The odor smelled like something rotting mixed together with the smell of mud. Furthermore, the smell was actually coming from the house in front of them. It was not a good sign, as Mark could not detect any people either. Mark looked at Rala, who was also staring at him, and nodded. While the others remained outside, the two men carefully entered by climbing up the fenced walls since the gate was locked. Looking around the lot, traces of what happened before were still present. The dried up blood on the cement pavement, the scattered things at the garage, and the pieces of glass littered around both outside and inside the house. The two silently walked around the house observing everything. It was then that they caught sight of something in the backyard that made Roland run forward and kneel on the ground. In the backyard, several graves were erected. Looking at the uneven patch of dirt that covered the graves, it was not fresh but might just be about a day or two after the graves were made. As for who these graves belonged to, there was no need to question. If it was just the wooden crosses erected on top of the graves, Roland might have thought of the possibility of his family being alive, but with the wooden placards nailed unto the crosses bearing the names of his family members, he started to feel remorse. Mark tapped the shoulders of Roland, who kneeled in front of the graves while weeping. He did not say any words of condolence, as he knew that no words would placate his best friend's feelings right now. What Mark did afterwards was to search around for clues while waiting for his friend to weep everything out. It seemed that they were taking so long that May and Abigail checked on them. When the two saw what was going on, the May did not dare come closer and stopped the little girl from moving forward. Mark then approached them. "Gerger, just leave him alone for a little. That's not all his family, right?" May asked. "Surely not. There are only 8 graves there. Considering the numbers, if I remember correctly, there are 3 people missing." Mark spoke as he tried to recall Roland's family members that lived in this house. "You think the missing people you said dug these graves?" "The 2 probably. One of the missing people is a little girl after all. Roland's cousin. The other one's missing is his girlfriend and younger brother." Hearing Mark's explanation, May nodded. How long had it been? 10 minutes? 15 minutes? When Roland stood up and wiped his tears, almost 20 minutes had already passed. Seeing that May and Abigail were together with Mark now without him noticing, he felt a little awkward. It seemed that he showed them an embarrassing scene. "Sorry for taking so long." Roland apologized as he looked at the 3. Still, what May did made him snap out of his embarrassment and sadness. It was because she hid behind Mark before nodding to his apology. "Am I that scary?" Roland asked as he turned to Mark. "Don't worry about her. You approached too closely, triggering her fear of men." Mark replied helplessly. "Fear of men?" Roland looked at Mark with a doubtful expression. Mark, who saw that look of his, "Do you want another grave to be added there?" Of course, he knew what was going on in his friend's head. Still, though he felt a little angry, Mark also felt relieved. At least it looked like that Roland would be able to recover from this with no problem. Mark then froze and suddenly faced north. Within the almost 30-meter radius of his detection, he detected a group of 5 people. He then turned to Roland with a smile. "Roland, it looks like your tears will be short-lived." Hearing that, Roland looked at him with confusion. "What are you talking about? Enough questions. Let's go." Mark and the rest made their way out of the place. Day 5 to 6:56 a.m. Paradise Street, Queens Row Area A, Bakor City, Cavite. An owner-type Jeep was traversing the street. The Jeep looked refitted, with the windows and doors were welded with guard rails and the bumper being bent into a V-shape. Inside the vehicle was a group of 5 people consisting of 3 women and 2 men. "Boss, you should really stop going back to your house every morning and evening. Is there really a point to this?" The female driver asked the other female sitting on the front passenger seat. "Boss is still waiting for her boyfriend to go home. You shouldn't ruin her business." Before the female called boss could answer the question, the other female behind interrupted. "Sis, you think Big Brother will be able to return? The younger man sitting in the middle of the back seats asked the boss. I'm sure he will. I don't know when, but I'll keep on waiting. The female boss replied with a resolute expression in her face. Actually, even though she had that expression, she does not have much hope either. It was already the 5th day. It could be a short time if it was before the outbreak, but it was already too long at this moment. Looking at the scenery passing by, she could still clearly recall her experience during the time the infected flocked into this place. And to describe it in one word, hell. While everyone outside the streets were panicking, her boyfriend's father came home in a hurry despite the fact that he was already bitten. When he turned, he immediately attacked his defenseless family members together with her who was there at that time. Everyone else aside from her boyfriend's younger brother, Daniel, and her boyfriend's little cousin, Dorothy, was bitten and turned. During the commotion and when her future in-laws turned, she grabbed the remaining two to flee. Giving Dorothy to Daniel for safety, she forced their way against their infected family with brute force, even forcing her strength to the limit. Luckily, they managed to lock up their turned family members on the first floor of the house, and they managed to flee and hide at the second floor. Upon feeling safe, she was immediately assaulted with extreme pain in her body and fainted. Daniel and Dorothy panicked thinking that she was bitten, but upon checking her body, the two learned that she was not. But after she fell unconscious, she started burning with high fever that kept the panic of the two from reducing. Her fever took about half day and one night before she woke up with an indescribable strength in her body. To say, her physical strength tripled during the time she was asleep. She was both happy and sad. She knew that she could make use of this strength to survive whatever was happening. Still, during the time that she woke up, both Dorothy and Daniel was feeling weak due to lack of food and water, and she was the only one who could address that issue. In the end, she managed to kill her boyfriend's turned family members with remorse. Nevertheless, they were also a family to her, and thus, she dug graves for them. It was fortunate that she gained the strength that she managed to dig the hard ground despite her thin appearance, but she also felt sad that one of the first things she did with her strength was to kill and bury her boyfriend's family members. The three of them cried afterwards watching the graves she finished. Among the people that died were Dorothy's mother and father. The others were Daniel's mother, father, older sister, his older sister's husband, his older sister's daughter, and their little uncle. While she was recalling those memories, she heard the woman beside her speak to her. It looked that while she was dazed, they had already passed through the fence 8. Boss, there are people. As the street was curved to the east, they could not see the scene further around the corner. When they passed around the corner, they saw 2 vehicles and several people outside the house of her boyfriend. However, she did not recognize any one of these people. Everyone in their group felt anxious and they grabbed their weapons. They felt that a battle would not happen considering that the people were mostly females and a few children, but just in case. Day 5 to 7:03 a.m. Paradise Street, Queens Row Area A, Bakor City, Cavite. While Mark, Roland, May and Abigail were at backyard of Roland's house, an owner-type Jeep arrived alerting everyone else outside of the potential danger. As the whole place seemed to be devoid of the infected, all of them were cautiously wandering outside while not going too far from the car. When they were looking around, the whole place was really empty. That was why they were shocked after hearing the sound of a vehicle approaching and immediately retreated back inside their vehicles. When the incoming vehicle arrived, what they saw was the women and children scurrying towards the vehicles with only Odalina and Carlo left out to defend in case that the people that came were dangerous, while Amika was also ready to assist from inside their family vehicle. Under their cautious actions, several individuals alighted from the Jeep that stopped several meters away. "Who are you people? What are you doing at our house?" Woman that alighted from the front passenger seat bellowed. That question made Odalina and the others bewildered. If this was their house, does this mean that? Before anyone was able to answer, a voice was heard coming from above the wall. "How rude, we came all the way here to bring home your boyfriend and not to get shouted at." Everyone immediately turned towards the wall next to the two groups and saw someone sitting over the wall. While Odalina and the others were able to feel relief, The people on the opposing side were shocked. After all, none of them managed to see how or when the person sitting on the wall got there. The most shocked, however, was the woman who just shouted before. Of course, she was able to recognize the person who she was looking at. Mark. The woman beamed into a smile, bewildering the members of her group. Nevertheless, it seemed that these people were not here to steal or do something against their group. Furthermore, it seemed that she was familiar with the person on top of the wall. To the woman's call, Mark did not reply and just looked behind the wall. "Geez. Can't you hurry up? I'm not an abnormal like you." Mark spoke to someone, making the woman bewildered, but hearing the voice that replied made her start to tear up. She then remembered what Mark said after she shouted. Then, there was no doubt that the familiar voice was her. "D." The woman bellowed, seeing another head pop up over the wall. "Nee." Roland shouted, seeing the face of her girlfriend. Then, he slipped while climbing and his head disappeared once more. "Nee," was how Roland addressed her girlfriend Nikki, while she addressed the former as D. These names were pep names the two always called each other. Mark hurriedly grabbed the arm of his best friend that was about to fall down and immediately pulled him up. After being pulled over the wall, Roland did not wait anymore and jumped down the wall and hurriedly embraced his beloved person. In the state of the world right now, where the chance of meeting your beloved people was nil, the emotions of the two overflowed as they embraced each other. While the couple was doing their business, Mark proceeded to help May and Abigail scale the wall. Mark even started to wonder how May was able to climb up this tall wall to get inside. Abigail was one thing, but May. As Mark and the two went down from the wall, the dramatic reunion of the two seemed to turn into a comedy instead. "Ouch. Aw. Knee. Let go. My back," Roland bellowed as he tried to get out of his girlfriend's embrace by reflex. The two hugged each other too tightly due to their emotions, but Nikki forgot the current state of her body and exerted too much force than Roland's body could handle. Their loving embrace turned into a spinal lock all of a sudden. Hearing the bellows of her boyfriend, Nikki paled as she hurriedly let go of Roland. The latter, after being freed, fell down on the ground, kneeling while clutching his back. Nikki, who was the perpetrator, squatted beside Roland and carefully patted his back with a sorry expression. Everyone who was watching the two became speechless. Just what was this couple up to? Was it to make them cry or make them laugh? "Sorry, D." Nikki earnestly apologized to Roland. "I'm fine, Nee. But how are you too strong?" Roland sat on the ground as he spoke. It seemed that his legs became jelly due to the pain that suddenly assaulted his back. I don't know how to explain this either," Nikki replied with a bitter smile. She only knew that she fell unconscious after getting into safety, and she was already like this after she woke up. "Really, Roland? You're asking that question? What's the point of me explaining about it before if you're going to forget?" Mark spoke while approaching the two with May and Abigail beside him. When Mark spoke, the attention of the members of Nikki's group was turned towards him. Their eyes lit up upon seeing May's appearance, which made her shrink back and hide behind him. Mark also saw that, but since all of them were just looking at her with admiration, he had no reason to reprimand them. Roland, on the other hand, had his eyes staring at Nikki after hearing what Mark had just said. That strength she had just used was too abnormal. Remembering Mark's explanations before, Nikki could either be a mutator or an evolver. RAAR. Grr. GRRRAA. Roland was about to ask Nikki about it when they suddenly heard loud growling sounds coming from the direction where the fence gate was located. "You two should continue your reunion later," Mark said to the couple while looking at the direction the growls were coming from. He then turned towards Nikki. "Is there a place where you are staying?" "There is." Nikki nodded. "Then, bring us there." "What's with the hurry? This place is safe." The woman who was driving the jeep interjected. Clank. Ting. Talk. They then heard the sounds of metal snapping off. "Are you sure about it?" Mark asked her, making her face red in embarrassment. She had just said that it was safe here and they heard those sounds. It was obvious that those sounds were produced due to the fence gate being torn down. "Odell, Carlo, get back inside the vehicle." Mayor, Gale, you two also get inside. Mark gave his orders, making everyone immediately follow. He then turned towards the couple. You two should separate for now. I'm sure there's no space for another person in that jeep. But Nikki tried to protest but was stopped by Roland. It's fine. We're going in the same place anyway. Nikki nodded. Say, where are we going? We can make our vehicle lead the way. Mark suddenly asked, making Nikki's group look at the MB Sprinter. Seeing that it was fully equipped with protection measures and that V-shaped ram, they could only agree. The vehicle was surely better than theirs, and it would be safer if it would be the one to lead the way. We're going at the elementary school. The unfamiliar man in Nikki's group replied. You mean the elementary school few blocks away? Mark was surprised inside. If going by logic, then the elementary school was one of the most dangerous places in an outbreak, but this group actually made that place as their base. No, there should be more to this, Mark thought and nodded. Mark jumped at the roof of the MB Sprinter and readied his assault rifle while Nikki and her group returned to their jeep. Pulling out the radio, Mark spoke. Mayor. Gerger, I'm here. Tell Odell to return, take a U-turn, and we'll lead the others. Go straight on the street. We're going to the main road at the end. Gerger, she already heard. All right, let's head out, Mark said, and the vehicle started to roar. It was the same for Rosamie's vehicle, as they could also hear the conversation through the radio Mark gave them. Tang. Tang. It seemed that the fence gate could not hold any more. Before the three vehicles could make a U-turn, several festered dogs ran towards them from the direction of the fence gate. Aiming his gun, Mark started to shoot. TSST, 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 TSST. The fast-moving infected dogs were riddled with holes before they could even reach the vehicles. Seeing the frightening infected animals, Nikki's group felt their chest tighten. These past days, they encountered infected humans, but this was the first time they saw a pack of rotting dogs. They thought that only humans could get infected, as they spent the days without encountering even one infected animal. But what in the world was this? Still, seeing Mark on the roof of the vehicle shooting down the fast-moving dogs and killing them with great accuracy, they felt relieved. BROOM. The three vehicles drove away from the area and through the fence gates after Mark opened it for them as quick as possible before entering the vehicle this time. It was because, aside from the dogs, the common infected also started to gather around the entrance of the street. It was actually expected, as the Jeep Nikki and her group was riding on was not a silent type of vehicle. On the other hand, it was actually the first time Nikki and her group went here with a vehicle. They had just acquired the Jeep yesterday and managed to drive it after gathering fuel from abandoned vehicles on the streets. And such, it was the first time for them to encounter too many infected at this part after they cleared the street slowly. The three vehicles did not drive that far. After about 2 minutes, they reached the main road where the entrance of the elementary school was located. Seeing the state of the school, Mark's group was surprised. The school walls and gates were thoroughly reinforced, and there were guard towers now built on the other side of the school gates. The guards on the towers saw several vehicles approaching the gates and went alert. They were not familiar with the two vehicles after all, especially an odd-looking and oddly sized large van. However, seeing the Jeep where Nikki and her group were aboard, the guards relaxed a bit. Open the gates, Nikki bellowed while popping out her head from the window of the Jeep. Seeing her face, the guards turned respectful and immediately opened the gates and let the three vehicles in. While the Jeep did not garner attention, many people were watching as the two foreign vehicles traversed the way inside the school compound. It was lucky that Mark made Amika retract her vines around their family vehicle to avoid more attention. Looking around as the Jeep led the other vehicles to the parking, Mark concluded that this place was not a base but actually a small community. Mark could detect around 1,000 people inside the school compound. It also made Mark sure that the leading people of his place were sure of high standing. It was because they could see some people wearing uniforms of military soldiers while some were wearing police attire. However, the respectful expression of the guards when they saw Nikki did not escape his eyes. Using that to deduct the circumstances, It was likely that Nikki's standing in this place was not low either. It should be a given because of the fact that Nikki was an evolver. Others might not know, but he could. Nikki did not have the same pattern of emotional fluctuation that mutators had, but she actually had that kind of strange strength. Now, Mark realized a pressing matter. Not only that his ability as an empath was useless towards the infected, but it seemed that he could also not discern the evolvers from normal people unless they showed their abilities. Still, Mark was thankful that at least he could make use of these abilities against people now. Arriving at the parking area, Mark and Roland alighted from the vehicle, but he did not let the others get out of the vehicle. After all, it was a foreign environment to them. Nikki and her group was one thing, but others might not welcome their existence in this place. However, it seemed different for Amika as she happily went out of the vehicle. She ran towards Mark, attracting the attention of everyone watching their arrival. Her green-colored hair with small pink flowers was really conspicuous. Nikki and her group members also stared at the girl with shock. "Nay, scary uncle, there's too many people here." Amika happily spoke to Mark, making him slap his forehead. He managed to make the others inside the MB Sprinter to lay low. He was not able to make it for Amika, who loved to skip around. "Forget it," Mark sighed. While Mark was in that dilemma and Roland approached Nikki, several people came to them. Seeing the man and woman leading the group, Mark was able to pick up several pieces of the puzzle. It was because the two people were familiar to him and were a political couple. The man was a city councilor while the woman was the barangay captain of this area. It was no wonder they managed to use this place as a settlement. However, Mark knew that there were still missing pieces. The power of these two was not enough to establish this settlement on their own. Furthermore, he doubted that these two was able to command the soldiers lurking around even with their status. He then noticed another group coming toward them from another direction. The group was composed of men and women in military uniform. Mark was perplexed now. They had just arrived here, but why were all these people gathering here? Day 5 to 7:12 a.m. Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Suddenly seeing two groups of hard-to-deal people coming their way the moment they parked their vehicles, Mark frowned. However, noticing that the groups did not seem to have come with ill intentions, his face remained impassive. On the other hand, the lively Amika shrunk back and behind Mark. As a child, she could not handle the natural pressure that people with position exudes. Given the fact that her senses were also enhanced at her mutation, this was not something that a child like her could handle. Rosamie, who was still inside the vehicle, wanted to also get out bed. She saw that Mark was looking at her while shaking his head once. She refrained from doing so. She was also not worried about her daughter, considering that Mark was there. Seeing his feats, despite the fact that they had not really interacted for too long, she knew that he was not someone who would put his people into danger. Nikki and her group, however, were also bewildered as to why the soldiers were also coming here. The barangay chairwoman and the city councilor was one thing, since they had interacted several times before, as they were the ones in charge of the welfare of the people in the settlement. The soldiers, however, were different. Due to the current affairs of the country, the status of the soldiers was elevated even above of the local officials, and they were the people in charge of the security of the settlement in search of supplies and necessities. There were barely any interaction between the soldiers and the survivors either. On the other hand, the group led by the city councilor was also bewildered as to why the soldiers were here. After all, there was no reason for them to come out at this moment and go to this very location. The city councilor and his people were here to communicate with the group of that frequently goes out of the settlement, and were also participating in gathering the supplies from the establishments around the settlement, but they could not think of a reason for the other party. "Ma'am Cat, why are all of you here?" Nikki asked the barangay chairwoman with bewildered expression. "Actually, we want to speak with your group since earlier, but your group went out too early that we did not manage to inform you." "Is that so?" Nikki looked troubled. She wanted to catch up with Roland since they had just reunited with each other, but for these people to come at the wrong time. What's going on? Why would these people look for you?" Roland approached Nikki and asked while frowning. "It's a long story, D." Nikki was really troubled. Seeing the unfamiliar man speaking to Nikki, The barangay chairwoman, Catherine Palabrica, could not help but ask. Ms. Faja, who is this? Ma'am Cat, this is Roland, my boyfriend who I'm looking for these past days. Nikki said while putting her right hand around Roland's arm. Hearing what Nikki said, Ma'am Cat was surprised to think that Nikki would be fortunate to reunite with her partner. Then, she saw another man standing not behind them while seemingly on guard, and the 11-year-old girl with strange green-colored hair and seemingly real flower hair accessories. They are? That guy is Mark, a friend of ours. Hearing the introduction, Mark nodded towards the barangay chairwoman without any notion to speak to her. The chairwoman did not seem to mind as she nodded back, but it seemed that the subordinates behind did not take it positively and started to frown while looking at Mark. Mark, on the other hand, did not put their hostility into his mind. Seeing that the barangay chairwoman and her group were here for Nikki, he was relieved. However, it seemed that it was different from the goal of the other group. It was because as they approached, they were all looking towards the MB Sprinter beside Mark. It was as if they were examining the vehicle for some reason or another. As the group of soldiers approached, it was Councillor Reynald Palabrica who first greeted them. Captain Della Rosa, is there something you need to come out here at this time? The councillor asked the about in his late 30s leading the group of soldiers. It's nothing much, I just received from my men that someone we are watching out for might have arrived. Captain Della Rosa replied with a smile. The captain then looked at the woman in her late 20s also wearing a military uniform beside him. Irene, what do you think? The female soldier called Irene was intently observing Mark and his vehicle. Nodding, she turned back to the captain. Captain, it's no doubt positive. A luxury armored van with anti-infected accessories and solar panels covering the roof along with a scary-looking man. Everything matches. Councillor Palabrica, who was speaking to Captain Della Rosa, was bewildered at the two's conversation. No, not only him but everyone who heard them, which included Mark. Actually, hearing the woman's description, Mark's face became dark. Nevertheless, he could only sigh. Just who wanted him to have this kind of face? What bewildered him more was that these soldiers were actually looking for him. He never encountered these people even before the outbreak for sure. While he was staring at the group, Captain Della Rosa excused himself from the conversation with the city councillor and made his way towards Mark. Do you need something from me? Mark asked impassively. Even though he could not detect any ill intent from the leader of the soldiers, there was no need for him to be friendly either, especially with the fact that they seemed to know him despite knowing anything about the other party. I would like to ask if perhaps you are called Mark? Captain Della Rosa spoke in a humble tone which bewildered everyone including the group of the chairwoman. Hearing the other party say his name further bewildered Mark. Do I know you? Mark asked while frowning. Fearing that Mark might misunderstand something, Captain Della Rosa hurriedly introduced himself. I'm Captain Edmundo Della Rosa, leader of the 7th Rescue Squad under General Miguel Perez. When the captain finished his introduction with a salute, Mark was enlightened. Given that this person was actually under General Perez of Bay City Evacuation Zone, this might have to do with the feats he displayed back in the mall along with the fact that he saved the general's daughter Angeline. Did General Perez inform you guys about me? He did. Due to some circumstances, we are stranded here, but we managed to keep contact with the Bay City. We heard about your actions about saving General Miguel's daughter. Actually, Angeline is like a relative to me, so I also have to thank you about saving her. I see. But why did he inform you about me? Mark asked in confusion. He never told anyone about his plans before at the mall. Except for the fact that he planned on looking for his friends, he never told anyone where he was going. He did not even tell Angeline or Paula. It was Angeline's friend Paula. It seemed that she informed the general about the possibility of us meeting you and your group, so the general instructed us a few things. Few things, it is in case that we met you and your group, we should offer our assistance. Captain Della Rosa said with a sincere expression. It seemed that he was not reluctant to follow the general's orders. It was the same for the men under the captain. Mark was now smiling bitterly. He did not expect that saving Angeline and Paula that time would lead to many things. Back then, he was just looking for potential teammates that he could trust to watch his back. He did not even know who the two girls were and knew nothing of their background. If he did not save the two, the people back in the mall would still be trapped there and probably rot in the mall. Because he saved them, that the shutters in the tech zone closed before they could return, leading him to meet May. If he did not meet the two helped Rhea and Saria that the two girls tried to save, he would not meet Abigail either. Due to the Angeline, he became an evolver. He also received good weapons because of her father's assistance. He would also have not met with Odalina if not for her. Now, because of Paula, this happened. Even though Mark could not think of any way how Paula managed to deduce this, it still happened. It seemed that saving Angeline and Paula became the foundation of his strength at this moment, and the two still continued to try and pay the favor of saving their lives back then. While Mark was conversing with the captain, the men led by the Palabrica couple were bewildered seeing the squad captain speak with respect to the man they scorned for disrespecting the chairwoman. It was also the same for Nikki and her group. Since they were living in this place for several days already, they knew how unapproachable this group of soldiers was. But this time, the soldiers were actually looking at the scary-looking man with both respect and a bit of reverence. What was happening in front of them was really unfathomable. "This place is not suitable for a talk. Can we invite you to our quarters? We wanted to ask you a few things," Captain Della Rosa said as the group was gathering the attention of many people in the vicinity. It would not be good if the third faction appeared here at this moment. Even though Mark looked impassive at the moment, he also felt stiff as the piercing eyes of everyone were gathered at him. "In that case, lead the way. Is it possible to park our vehicle somewhere else? At least close to your quarters?" Hearing him agree, the captain's face lit up, but he felt troubled about the question. "This place is the only place we could park vehicles. Look there, our trucks and vehicles were also parked just by the other side." Captain Della Rosa pointed at the plaza area several meters away where the military vehicles were parked. Mark actually knew about it since this school was the same school he attended when he was younger. Back then, this place still have a wide square at the center, but after several years of building additional classroom buildings and renovations, the wide space became lesser and lesser. Mark was just trying his luck. "If you are worried about your vehicles, I can order some of my men to guard the vehicles in shifts so you don't have to worry about your things." Captain Della Rosa proposed a suggestion. That was one thing Mark was worried about, but not the reason he was worried the most. One was because he would not be able to leave Laylaps, the huge beetle, and Jeanette alone in the vehicle, since they would probably take a bit of time. If that was the case, he could only bring them out, exposing them to all the people here. Nevertheless, he had no other choice. He also wanted to take advantage of the fact that he could ask these soldiers for help. In that case, he could ask them to find his few friends that lived in Queen's Row and sped up the search. "Okay then, let's go with your arrangement." Mark accepted the captain's proposal before making his way towards the vehicles and beckoned others to come out. One by one, the members of Mark's group went out of their vehicles. Seeing May stepping out of the vehicle, everyone who was watching had their eyes dilated in amazement of seeing a beautiful woman. Mark could even detect several eyes that contained lust, making him frown. Due to the stares she was gathering, May immediately latched on Mark's arm as if she was hiding from everyone. Aside from May, the ceramic doll like Abigail went out, also garnering the attention of the others. The little girl also went towards Mark. "Papa, up!" Abigail raised her arms, wanting to be carried by Mark. Using his free arm, Mark lifted the little girl up. Everyone who heard the beautiful little girl call Mark, "Papa," could not help but feel their chests tighten. Seeing the contrast between the appearance of the father and the daughter, then it was likely that the little girl took her looks from her mother. Their eyes then fell onto May, who was hiding behind Mark, and their imaginations started to jump around as the men cursed Mark for being too lucky. The others also went out, and seeing the women stepping out of the vehicles, the eyes of the men around lit up. Despite the fact that none of them could be compared to May, they were still above most of the women here, especially the sexy-figured mature woman who came out of the driver's seat. Then, everyone choked once more. It was because after everyone went out, A golden-furred dog with a golden horn on its head and golden spikes on its body valiantly walked out of the vehicle while pulling a large beetle about the size of a human adult. Odell, also get Jeanette, we can't leave her here alone. All right, master. Master, everyone felt faint. What kind of play was this? Odalina then went back inside the vehicle and soon went out pulling a chain. When the other end of the chain was on sight, everyone choked on their saliva. It was because they could see another beautiful woman tied up with the chains. Still, everyone looking at her could feel that something was wrong but could not fathom what it was. Seeing Mark's group, Captain Della Rosa was about to faint. In the report he received before, Mark was an evolver that could fight on par with an unknown, while he had an adopted daughter that could possibly be another evolver or might even be a mutator. Now, however, seeing the green-haired girl, a 4-year-old boy whose skin was covered with 3 barks and the large golden dog, he was really about to pass out. It was obvious that all these people were mutators. What in the hell are these people? That question echoed inside the captain's mind along with the soldiers under his command. Day 5 to 7:16 a.m. Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Captain Della Rosa and his subordinates found it hard to believe what they were seeing in front of them. As they were keeping in contact with the Bay City after they settled in this place, they knew that within the ranks of the military at Bay City, they only had 15 evolvers that were strong enough to fight trained soldiers despite the lack of training. Still, despite their current strength, the difference between those evolvers and mutators were vast, with the exception of one evolver that came from the people that was rescued from the city mall. As for the number of mutators that the military managed to recruit, there were only 2. This was how rare for people to become mutators. However, seeing the number of confirmed mutators in Mark's small group, these soldiers totally felt that it was inconceivable. Furthermore, Mark, who was the leader of this group, was an evolver that was reported to have strength on par with the unknown. While the soldiers were bewildered with the unfathomable group Mark led, the attention of the other people was on Jeanette, who was chained and was obediently following behind Odalina, who was pulling the other end of the chains. Most of the spectators were bewildered, but there was someone who was looking at Jeanette with agitation. It was one of the women in Nikki's group, the only female seated in the back of the jeep before. Feeling his agitation, Mark could not help but look at her. It was because the change in her emotions was too sudden from the bewildered expression she had before. When Mark saw that she was looking at Jeanette, several guesses immediately appeared in Mark's mind. What a small world! Mark thought as he assessed the appearance of the woman, who seemed to be about 19 or 20, that had a few similarities to Jeanette. Sister, the woman called out with a stifled voice, confirming Mark's thoughts. Mara, what's wrong? Nikki also noticed her peculiar behavior. The woman called Mara could not hear Nikki anymore as she sluggishly walked towards the chained Jeanette while her eyes started to tear up. The spectators were also bewildered to her actions, and they started speculating while murmuring. While she was walking towards her sister, someone blocked her path. Looking at the person, it was the man who seemed to be the leader of this group, Mark. Realizing that this person should be the one responsible of chaining her sister, she glared at him. Seeing the actions of Mara, who was blindly walking towards Jeanette, Mark gave Abigail to May and blocked the woman's path. She's your sister. She is. What did she do? Why did you people chain her? Mara bellowed with tears in her eyes. The gallery that was watching looked at Mark and his group, realizing that the chained woman was actually her sister. Learning about the fact, the other 2 members of Nikki's group moved forward to mediate. They were not blind, and they realized that there should be more to this. There were other women in Mark's group, so it would be unreasonable if Mara's sister was the only one tied up. Despite the leader's appearance being scary, the eyes of the beautiful woman and the little girl were giving him could not be faked. Mara, calm down. There should be a reason why your sister is tied up. The woman who was driving the jeep earlier held Mara and gently pulled her back. The man, on the other hand, was also glaring at Mark, as he also seemed to recognize Jeanette, and it looked like that he had a relationship with Mara. Please, answer her question. The man was glaring, but he was still rational and politely asked. Given how the soldiers treated this man, It was better for them to not get on his bad side. However, it was not Mark who spoke after but the female soldier who was always beside Captain Della Rosa. "Mr. Mark, if I'm correct, this woman is that infected you was rearing." Hearing that, Mark turned to the female soldier with surprise. "I didn't expect that you people even know that. It was within the report we received about you." Mark was further bewildered. It seemed that the report they received about him and his group was very detailed prior to the time they separated with the people and soldiers at the mall. Still, he could not think of the reason why. After all, if it was just for gratitude, that much detail was not necessary. As if reading what was in his mind, Captain Della Rosa spoke. "It had something to do with what we were going to ask of you. That is the reason we tried to procure as much information about you and your group." Hearing that, Mark nodded with realization. It was really not just for gratitude. There was sure something these soldiers needed from him. On the other hand, everyone around could not help but take a second look at Jeanette learning that she was an infected. Mara could also not believe it either. Looking at Jeanette's current appearance, there could be no one that would be able to associate her from the infected. "All of you are lying. Look at my sister. There's no way that she's an infected." Everyone could only nod at Mara's claims. Even the soldiers were bewildered. If not for Mark confirming their thoughts and the report they received before, they would also question it. To everyone's skeptical looks, Mark did not speak but walked in front of Jeanette and unbuttoned the buttons on her clothes. "What are you doing?" Mara bellowed and charged towards Mark. "Odile, restrain her for a bit." Mark spoke while removing the second button. Odilina immediately went forward and restrained Mara, locking her arms. "Let me go." Mara tried to escape from Odilina's grasp, but like a clamp, Odilina's arms locked her in place. Seeing that Mara was caught, the other two members of Nikki's group also charged in. "Let go of her." The man bellowed and charged in with his iron pipe. However, before he could attack, Nikki's voice echoed into their ears. "Maverick. Delia. Stop. Mara. Look at your sister." Nikki's voice brought the three to their senses and looked at Jeanette. After Mark removed 3 buttons on Jeanette's blouse, he pulled her left collar, exposing her shoulder. On the shoulder, a bite-sized wound that had yet to heal was revealed. A part of the flesh on her shoulder was even missing. Despite the fact that wound was deep, it was not bleeding anymore. It was the bite that turned Jeanette into an infected. It had yet to heal, or maybe it would never heal at all without using any extraordinary means. Seeing the bite wound, Mara lost her energy and slumped on Odilina's grasp. Odilina gently let her go and pushed her towards the man. "Take her." The man, who was also shocked, absent-mindedly took Mara from Odilina before she walked away. Mark then fixed Jeanette's blouse and gave the chain to Odilina once more. Actually, he did not want to show such scene, but in respect to Jeanette's sibling, he showed the proof. Now that he did, there was no reason to stay here and become everyone's entertainment anymore. "Captain, let's head off already," Mark said after picking up his bag and a few things from the vehicle. "All right, follow us." The squad captain agreed. However, before they could even turn around, Mara shouted, "Wait. If my sister is already infected, why are you bringing her? Also, why is my sister not attacking anyone? And why does she look like no different from a human?" Mara suppressed her grief and asked. Mark looked at her with an expression that looked like an idiot. "I really have no reason to answer, but let me tell you. When I caught her, she's already like the others you see outside, someone who won't live without infecting others. However, while in my captivity, she turned like this for some unknown reason. As for your third question, I can't answer that here." After saying that, he turned to the captain and nodded before the soldiers started to lead Mark's group away. "Wait." Mara bellowed again. The other people in Mark's group glanced at her, but seeing that Mark did not look back anymore, they could only follow, leaving everyone else. As for Roland, he would remain with his girlfriend for now, as it seemed that the barangay chairwoman needed something from Nikki. Seeing that the commotion had calmed down, the spectators around started to disperse, leaving Nikki's group and the chairwoman's group in the place. The chairwoman then led Nikki and Roland towards their quarters while the members of Nikki's group decided to return to their resting area. Asterisk 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 day 5 to 7:25 a.m. Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. At one of the buildings at the far eastern side of the school, a man was drinking wine in the topmost central room. It was then that an armed man barged into the room. "Leader!" the man bellowed. The person who was called leader was a man in his 30s. He looked quite muscular, but that was not his most noticeable feature. If one would see him for the first time, what they would first pay attention to was his limbs that were filled with thick fur similar to a monkey. "What are you yelling for?" The leader frowned as he reprimanded the man that barged in. "Sorry, leader. It's just there seemed to be a formidable group of people that had just arrived." "Formidable? What do you mean?" the leader asked with a skeptic expression. "Boss, you won't believe me, but Captain Della Rosa was too polite with the leader of that group. Also, it seemed that the captain knew of that person. That stubborn captain was being polite. That indeed is strange. If that group is not formidable, that captain would surely not put them in his eye. Do you know where that group had come from?" "No, leader. After they arrived, the soldiers escorted them away. It seems that they needed something from that group." "Need something? Are they perhaps soldiers?" "I don't think so. Their group was filled with beautiful females and strange-looking people. Their man who seemed to be their leader looked like a criminal though." Hearing that reply, the leader was bewildered further. "What do you mean by strange-looking? There is a girl with green hair, a boy with skin on his arms looking like a tree bark, a golden dog, and they also seem to be rearing a strange infected with them." "Strange infected?" the leader further asked, making the armed man recount what happened. "It looks like I need to meet this group you're talking about." The leader downed his glass of wine into his mouth and stood up, heading out of the room with the armed man following behind him. Asterisk 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 mark and the others who were following behind the soldiers were now walking across the pathway that led to one of the buildings at the southwestern end of the school. Along the way, they could see the unfortunate state the people living in this settlement had. The people looked famished and had not taken a bath or even wiped their bodies for some time. Even the children had no energy to play around like how it was before the outbreak. Sadness and fear were apparent in the eyes of most people they saw. "Even though we are rationing food to them, it's not enough. We could only eat here twice a day. One in the morning and one in the evening. As for hygiene, we barely even have water to drink, so no one could even think of taking a bath." The female soldier beside the captain took the initiative to explain as she saw that everyone was observing the state of the place. As the soldier took the initiative to explain, Mark took the opportunity to ask something. "Are there different factions here? You soldiers seem to have a separate group from the chairwoman and the city councilor." "That's right, there's 3 factions here leading this settlement. First is the faction led by Mam Cat and Sir Reynald Palabrica. They were the ones who took the initiative to establish this settlement. They're also the ones in charge of the welfare of the survivors. As you can see, they're not doing a very good job at it. The second are us, the soldiers that came from Bay City. We actually came here to rescue people, but we ended up being stuck here ourselves. We run the security in this place and we also do supply runs every day. Though ours and the first faction are not on bad terms, both factions don't want to be under another. They wanted to rule this place and we can't be under them either since we have orders directly from the government. Still, it can be said that we are on allied terms. The third faction, however, is different. It is led by someone who calls himself Dominator. No one knows if it is really his name or an alias. He came to this place and established his authority along with a huge group of armed men." Everyone was intently listening to the female soldier. Mark, however, frowned as he asked a question. "That Dominator is a mutator, am I right?" The female soldier was shocked. No, not only her but also the other soldiers. They all froze in the spot. "How did you know?" Captain Della Rosa asked. "I have my means. More importantly, that guy is on the way here right now with his men." Mark said as he draw his shotgun out and pulled the pump after releasing the safely of the gun.